Chapter 1: The Smell of Corpses. On October 14th, 2024, I moved into a new apartment. You can find it on Google Maps at 363 Leticia Street. Right after my move, strange things started happening. I was sleeping for 14 hours, but when I woke up, I felt exhausted, had headaches, and didn't even have the strength to walk. When a friend suggested meeting up, I told her that I couldn't because something was wrong with me. I was sleeping for 14 hours but still felt exhausted and weak. I thought I was sick. This went on for several days. I kept waking up tired and with headaches, despite sleeping 12 or even 14 hours. Additionally, during the night, a corpse-like smell appeared in the bathroom. If you know what a dead person or animal smells like, you'll probably understand what I'm talking about. The more I used the bathroom exhaust fan, the stronger the unpleasant odor became. As I later found out, the smell in the bathroom could have been coming from other rooms where the exhaust fans were installed incorrectly. Instead of venting air outside, they were also releasing it into the space above the ceiling. From there, the air traveled through tunnels between rooms, including mine. At night, my room smelled like urine and sewage. The sewage smell was also present in the hallway, near the staircase and the elevator. Of course, I reported the problem to the building management, but they said they didn't smell anything, even though I could clearly smell it, and it got worse every night. On October 29th, I received my first electricity bill for 2,772 PHP and a water bill for 701 PHP. This was the bill for 11 days of living there, from October 14th to October 25. Naturally, I went to the office to find out why I was being charged so much for just 38 kilowatt-hours of electricity and a few cubic meters of water. That's a separate story, but what's important is that during my visit, I learned that the device that occasionally made a knocking sound on the ground floor was a septic tank. That's how I discovered that wastewater didn't go directly into the city sewage system, but instead into a septic tank located right under my room. The turning point. The breakthrough moment came on October 31st, 2024, when I found out that the sewage smell in my room was coming from the grease trap under the sink. I opened the lid and saw that the sewage pipe was left open, which explained the smell. It also became clear that the grease trap had been installed incorrectly, backward, which was why the pipe remained open, letting the smell escape. I sent a video to the building management, asking them to show it to the plumbers, convinced they would immediately understand the mistake and fix it. I specifically pointed out the incorrect installation. The pipe from the sink led into the right side of the grease trap. There was a removable box in the middle and a pipe on the left side going into the sewage system. However, the box was meant to collect food waste and grease, but in this setup, nothing from the sink was entering it. Instead, the left pipe, which should have been an inlet, was open, allowing sewage gas from the septic tank on the ground floor to rise through the pipe and leak into my room. I requested that they reinstall the grease trap correctly so it would fill with water and block the sewage gases. However, to my surprise, the plumbers didn't understand the problem, and I had to explain it multiple times. They checked the grease traps in other rooms and found that they were all installed incorrectly. In all 44 rooms, the grease traps were backward, allowing sewage odors to leak into the rooms and from there into the hallway. In the end, the plumbers reinstalled the grease trap in my room correctly and confirmed that it was now working as intended. Water flowed into the box, food waste and grease were collected, and the pipe leading to the sewage system was blocked by water, preventing odors from escaping. However, the problem remained unresolved in all other rooms. I have gone into these technical details so that other plumbers installing similar grease traps can understand how to install them correctly and what happens when they are installed incorrectly. The concept of a grease trap is great. It prevents food waste and grease from going into the sewage system, but the execution in this building was completely wrong. Over these 2 weeks, I had already noticed a pattern. The more I used the exhaust fan, the worse the air in my room became. Now I understood why. My exhaust fan was removing air from my room, creating negative pressure and pulling sewage gases in from the open pipe inside the grease trap. After fixing the grease trap, I stopped sleeping for 12 to 14 hours and instead began sleeping for just 8 hours, feeling much better. However, the problem didn't end there. Even when I wasn't using the exhaust fan, the sewage smell still entered my room. I had already sealed the entrance door to prevent smells from coming in from the hallway, but the odor seemed to be coming from the ceiling. I suspected that the smell was traveling through ventilation tunnels between rooms, from rooms above, below, and next to mine. I requested that the grease traps in the rooms above and next to mine be reinstalled correctly, but I never received a response. A few minutes later, I heard someone locking all the neighboring rooms. When I asked why, I was told that this was an order from building management. The gas attack. I was outraged. It seemed obvious that an open sewage system in a building was unacceptable, but instead of fixing the problem, they were just locking rooms so no one could see it. I went to the office and argued that sewage odors were coming from rooms where the sewage pipe was open, and they needed to reinstall all grease traps immediately. If they just locked the doors, the smell would still escape into the hallway through the gap under the doors. However, they told me they had already fixed the issue in my room and wouldn't be making changes in other rooms, saying, "It wasn't my concern." I was furious and cursed out loud to make sure they understood. That was the end of our conversation, but the problem got even worse. Now, almost every night at 4 a.m., a gas attack began. This wasn't just a sewage smell anymore. This was hydrogen sulfide, H2S. I woke up from the strong smell of H2S, left my room, and waited at McDonald's until 8 a.m. before returning to sleep. Since I wasn't fluent enough in English to explain all the technical details in person, I wrote a detailed document explaining the problem and delivered it to the office on November 11th, 2024. Later that day, they responded, claiming that the odors were not coming from their sewage system, but from a neighboring building. This deeply upset me. Even after I explained exactly where the gases were coming from and how they circulated inside the building, they still denied the problem. However, from their response, I learned that their septic tank used the BioGreen advanced oxidation process. Unlike a regular septic system, which operates passively without electricity, this system used electricity for advanced wastewater treatment. It produced not only H2S and ammonia, NH3, but also ozone, O3, which explained why I was sleeping for 12 to 14 hours and still feeling exhausted. I had been breathing ozone all night, along with sewage gases. Gases from the executive suites. The next turning point happened on the night of November 16th, 2024, when yet another gas attack began. I went out onto the balcony of my room, stretched my hand forward, and felt that hydrogen sulfide was blowing onto my hand from somewhere above, as the gas flows bounced off my hand and hit my nose. An indirect confirmation of the presence of hydrogen sulfide was the ash-colored dust that settled on the balcony railing. In the morning, I examined the balcony again and realized that hydrogen sulfide was entering my room through the balcony door, which could not be sealed hermetically. And on my balcony, it was being released from the exhaust vent of the extractor fan on the 6th floor, where the building management lived. I went down to the office and explained that the hydrogen sulfide was coming from the executive suite and asked when they were planning to reinstall the grease trap in the executive suite and stop poisoning me with hydrogen sulfide. But I received no response. They told me that I could move to another room or leave altogether and they would refund my safety deposit. I said that in order to decide whether to move, I needed to know if they were going to fix the problem with the incorrectly installed grease traps, especially in the executive suite. Because if they solved the problem today or tomorrow and stopped poisoning me with gases, then I could stay in the same room. But if not, then I would have to move. But I never received an answer. In the end, I decided to move to a room on the 5th floor at approximately the same price, as far away as possible from the executive suite. Chapter 2. New room and new gases. The process of moving from one room to another was not simple. I had to buy a second air conditioner and fix the ventilation system in the new room. If anyone needs a new air conditioner that was used for only 1 month, contact me, I'm selling it. It was also necessary to fix the grease trap in the new room, but instead of reinstalling the grease trap, the plumbers suggested a quick solution, simply installing an elbow pipe so that the sewer pipe would be covered with a layer of water and gases couldn't escape outside. Although the grease trap itself was not performing its intended function of collecting food waste and grease, my main concern was preventing sewer gases from entering my room, so I agreed. Before moving, I was also told that if I continued to complain, they would terminate my contract and evict me from the apartments. Their wording was mocking. We can no longer entertain you. But for me, this was not entertainment and brought me no pleasure at all. I didn't enjoy dealing with these problems and explaining to them exactly how to fix them. I had already moved in August, September, October, and now again in November, and all I wanted was to finally settle down and live without having to move again. Nevertheless, the move was completed, and I was finally able to sleep normally at night since no one was poisoning me with hydrogen sulfide through the balcony door. However, on Walking Street, the amount of hydrogen sulfide increased significantly because by the end of November, the number of residents in the building had grown, and the decomposition process in the septic tank was producing gases that were being released onto the street from the executive suites and other rooms, not only at 4 a.m. but also in the evenings. I asked several foreigners on Walking Street if they could smell the hydrogen sulfide, and they said they could. Sometimes the smell was even noticeable inside McDonald's. That's how far it spread, reaching a distance of 1 kilometer from its source. I didn't complain to anyone, even though I didn't like that. Whenever I went to Walking Street, I had to breathe in hydrogen sulfide. Unexpectedly, at the beginning of December, one of the management staff told me that they had started reinstalling the grease traps and that it had actually helped. The smell in the building had decreased. I thought they had finally acknowledged the problem and were going to fix it, but as it turned out, I was mistaken. After moving to a room on the 5th floor, I was no longer bothered by gases from the southern part of the building because, as I explained earlier, they circulated in a loop within the southern part, rising up the staircase and being discharged onto the street below, while my room on the 5th floor was located in the northern part of the building. However, by the second half of December, gases began to be noticeable in my part of the building as well. And this was no longer just hydrogen sulfide, but also ammonia. I assumed that they were fixing the grease traps in all the rooms, starting with the southern rooms and moving north through the building. As a result, gases could no longer escape outside from the rooms where the grease traps had already been fixed. So they were now coming out in the northern part of the building where the grease trap issue had not yet been resolved. That's why I was now feeling the gases in the northern part of the building as well. I thought I just needed to wait until they fixed all the rooms and then the gases would no longer be able to escape and the air would become clean again. However, things didn't get better, and at the end of December, I asked one of the building management staff when the plumbers would finish reinstalling the grease traps in all the rooms, but I never received an answer. Then the New Year holidays arrived, and it turned into a real nightmare. From December 29th, 2024 to January 2nd, 2025, the ammonia smell was so strong that it caused burning not only in my eyes and nose, but also a feeling of suffocation, a lack of oxygen, and dizziness. By December 29th, I had already decided that I needed to leave this place, at least for a while, and my friend Leon bought tickets to Thailand for January 19th, 2025. I found out that the smell was entering my room from the room across the hall, which was being used as a hotel room. In the mornings, I could hear people in that room coughing, obviously from inhaling the gases. I would open the fire exit door in the hallway, my room door, and my balcony to ventilate the space. And during one of these moments, when my door was open for ventilation, children came out of the room across the hall. They ran after a foreign man, and then they returned to their room without him. As soon as they entered the room, they started coughing again. That's when I realized that it was the children who were coughing. I tried to carefully talk to an elderly Filipina who lived in the room across the hall, asking if she could smell the gases, but either she didn't understand the question or she pretended that everything was fine, perhaps following the principles of haya and loss of face, which are common in the Philippines. Since the entire management staff had left for the New Year holidays to Manila and other cities, and the office was closed, there was no one to complain to, and I had to wait until January 2nd when the office would reopen. On the morning of January 2nd, 2025, when ammonia fumes started flowing from the room across the hall again, I went down to the office and invited one of the staff members to come up to my room with me. He said to me, "Happy New Year," and promised to come to my room in a couple of minutes. I was furious because, for me, this year had started in hell and a nightmare, and his Happy New Year only made me angrier. And I had every right to be angry, not only because they had created unbearable living conditions, but also because, on a biochemical level, ammonia entering the bloodstream makes people irritable, and it was difficult to control. Following the principles of hiya and staying polite was simply impossible. I returned to my room and stood inside with the door open, waiting for him to arrive. Ammonia fumes were coming from under the door of the room across the hall because the air conditioner was running in that room, blowing the ammonia under the door. My door was sealed with a gasket, but ammonia still seeped into my room even when my door was closed. Since I was now standing with the door open, I had to use a respirator. When the staff member saw me wearing the respirator, he first smirked, but then he seemed embarrassed and avoided looking me in the eye during our conversation. I explained that the gases were coming from the room across the hall, that there were children coughing inside, and that the problem needed to be resolved as soon as possible. In response, I was told that they couldn't fix the problem right now because of privacy, and that they would address it once the tenants vacated the room. I asked, "Until what date is that hotel room booked?" The answer shocked me. Until January 20th, 2025. So they were suggesting that I continue breathing ammonia for another 18 days, poisoning both me and the tenants of that hotel room. Then I asked, "What will you do if someone dies in that room? Is privacy really more important than life and health?" To this, they replied that they would fix the problem, but not immediately. Fortunately, by the evening of that same day, January 2nd, they actually fixed the issue in the room across the hall. However, this did not completely solve the gas problem, as there were still rooms where the sewage was open, and I could smell ammonia coming from the northeastern side of the building, where my balcony faced. The next evening, I saw that the door to the room across the hall was open, and two Filipino women were packing belongings into garbage bags. I asked if the plumbers had actually fixed the problem or if they had just looked at it and left. They replied that the problem had been fixed. I asked if I could come in and check, and they allowed me to. I entered the room. It smelled of ammonia. The entire room was saturated with this smell, and it was no surprise that they were packing their belongings into trash bags because the odor had soaked into their clothes, which would need to be washed. I opened the grease trap lid and saw that they had installed an elbow pipe to prevent gases from escaping from the sewage into the room. I asked if they were moving to another room. They said no, it is not refundable. Later, I realized that they had simply left. I don't know if they got a refund for the remaining 17 days, but I never saw anyone in that room again. Meanwhile, gases continued to come from somewhere on the northeastern side of the building. Since the builders had installed my air conditioner incorrectly, and the ventilation grills were not fully outside but partially embedded into the wall, they were pulling air into the room. As a result, when the air conditioner was turned on, gases were being sucked into my room. One morning, I heard the sound of latches clicking and the noise of a falling lid from somewhere in the room below. Then someone started coughing. I stepped out onto the balcony and felt a stronger flow of ammonia, and after that, the gases suddenly stopped. From that day on, instead of ammonia, I began to smell ozone, O3, from the northeastern side of the building. Most likely, a plumber found another room where the grease trap had not been fixed, opened its lid, dropped it on the floor, coughed from the gases escaping from the sewage, and left the lid open to fix the grease trap later. From that moment, gases from the septic system began to escape freely outside, All the accumulated hydrogen sulfide and ammonia were released, and after that, ozone began to come out. The ozone was being generated by a purification system using biogreen advanced oxidation process technology. From that day on, life became easier. Of course, I started sleeping 12, 14 hours again and felt exhausted from inhaling ozone, but at least it didn't irritate my eyes and nose, so I no longer had to rinse them with water or flee from my room. The fact that ammonia had been replaced by ozone allowed me to once again confirm that the gases I was smelling in the bars on Walking Street were indeed coming from the place where I lived. Now I could smell ozone in the bars where I went to play pool. It accumulated inside the bars, and people there were coughing. But they probably didn't even understand why. Either they couldn't smell the ozone at all, or they detected some slightly sweet scent but didn't realize it was causing their coughing. If you asked them why they were coughing, the answer would simply be, I just felt like coughing. Chapter 3. Who else and where felt the gases? My enjoyment of ozone did not last long. About a couple of days later, the smell of hydrogen sulfide was added to the smell of ozone, and the smell of corpses reappeared in the bathroom, and a few days later, the smell of ammonia. Perhaps the plumbers fixed that open grease trap somewhere in a room below in the northern part of the building and closed its lid, which caused the ozone to stop escaping freely as before. Due to the lack of oxygen, the decomposition processes in the septic tank began to be accompanied by the release of hydrogen sulfide and ammonia, which were coming out of the sewer system in those rooms where the grease traps had not yet been repaired and were being discharged outside through the exhaust fans installed in the rooms of those residents. Another strange thing that happened, I was unable to log into my laptop system. When entering the password, I got an error, incorrect password, but I was 100% sure that I was entering it correctly. I tried typing it slowly and found that one of the letters was not being entered. Then I pressed the key with this letter several times with force, and it finally registered. I managed to log into the system and changed the login method so that I would not need to use this letter. It would seem that this has nothing to do with this story, but later I discovered that my caps lock was not working, and when I checked all the other keys, I found at least 4 non-working keys, but possibly even more by now. Then I asked ChatGPT, can ammonia damage a laptop keyboard, and received a detailed response from which it followed that it was precisely ammonia, the concentration of which was very high during the New Year holidays, that had damaged my laptop's keyboard. It is really no coincidence that a laptop I had been using since 2015 suddenly had at least 4 keys fail all at once. Meanwhile, the situation was getting worse, and it was hard for me to endure, especially on Sundays, when the number of residents using exhaust fans in their rooms increased, and gases were coming out to the northeastern part of the building from early morning, not just in the evenings like on weekdays. Since the building management was doing nothing to solve the problem, I decided to go through all the rooms myself, knock on each door, and ask the residents for permission to check whether the grease trap in their room was installed correctly. And so on January 8th, I printed out a list of rooms on a sheet of paper and headed to the second floor. However, I decided to start the inspection with the rooms in the northern part of the building, which were located below my room or somewhere nearby. As I went down to the second floor, I smelled cigarettes and followed the direction of the smell. As it turned out, it was coming from an open room precisely in the northern part of the building, and there was a plumber inside. I then showed him my paper with the list of rooms and explained that all the rooms needed to be checked and the grease traps in all the rooms need to be fixed because the gases were still coming out into the street and interfering with normal living conditions. We went up to the 5th floor to my room, and he called one of the building management staff to come up to my room. When he arrived, they opened the door of the room opposite mine, where a Filipino with children had lived just a week ago, and showed me that everything was in order there and that the grease trap had already been fixed. But I said that the gases were coming from the northeast side of the building, from the balcony side, so not all the rooms had properly installed grease traps yet, and all rooms needed to be checked and fixed where necessary. I was told that this was impossible, that they could only check empty rooms where there were no residents yet. But this is so stupid. On the contrary, it is most important to check and fix the grease traps in the rooms where people live and use the exhaust fans in the bathroom and kitchen, because it is precisely these rooms that draw gases from the open sewer pipe and release them outside at a rate of 16 milliquarters per minute. Which is why I can smell them from the northeast side of the building, and from there they enter my room as well as Walking Street and the bars located there. In the end, he got angry, took offense like a child, and just went back to the office. However, a few minutes later, he returned. He returned, knocked on the door, and handed me his phone so that I could speak with the head of the building management staff. From the conversation, it became clear that I had no right to go around the rooms and that I had to ask the building owner for permission. Of course, it would have been better for me if they had checked all the rooms themselves and fixed the grease traps, but since they had not done this for almost 3 months, I was forced to do it myself because the gases were making it impossible for me to live normally. However, they forbade me from doing it. Meanwhile, the gases were spreading over a considerable distance. On Friday, January 10th, 2025, I was playing billiards at Vincent Resort Hotel, 1.5 kilometers to the east. It was hard for me to believe, but closer to 4 p.m., even there, inside the building, I could detect a faintly sweet ozone smell. If it had been hydrogen sulfide, I might have assumed that it had come from somewhere nearby, but there was no possible source of ozone there. It really was coming from the sewer system of the building where I was living at the time. I understand that you might say that's impossible. Sewer gases spreading 1.5 kilometers? You're crazy. So now I will explain how it happened. As I found out back in November when I was living in a room on the 3rd floor, gases were coming out of the exhaust vent of a room on the 6th floor, reaching my balcony and the street. But now in January, the number of residents had increased by 2 or maybe even 3 times compared to the end of October. And on the northeast side of the building, there were exhaust vents from 31 rooms. Of course, not all rooms were occupied, but even if we assume that there were at least 5 rooms with faulty sewage systems where people lived, these 5 rooms were releasing 16 × 5 equals 80 milliquarters of contaminated air per minute onto the street. I made these simple calculations knowing that the extraction capacity of the Omni XFC 300 fan installed in the bathroom was 16 milliquarters per minute. The gases intensified in the evening from about 6 p.m. to 10 p.m. This was the time when people had already returned home from work and began actively using exhaust fans in the bathroom and kitchen for cooking. Now, let's assume that the layer of gas-contaminated air was 3 meters high. That is, a layer of gases at ground level with a height of 3 meters. It is possible to calculate the volume of contaminated air that was released over 4 hours by these 5 exhaust fans and divide it by 3 meters, the height of the layer, to determine the area over which this contaminated air would spread. But I simply asked ChatGPT to calculate this area and represent it as a rectangle with one side being 20 meters, the approximate length of the northeast wall of the building from where the gases were being released, and the other side being X meters, which could be determined knowing the contamination area and the first side length of 20 meters. It turned out to be 320 meters. This is the distance over which the gases spread from their source after 4 hours of operation of the 5 exhaust fans. Of course, these are very simplified calculations, and I underestimated both the number of rooms and the number of hours during which gases were being released from these rooms. But since this had been happening every day for 3 months, the contamination area had become very extensive. So it is not surprising that even at a distance of 1.5 kilometers, I could smell ozone, since it is not only heavier than air, but also the heaviest of all the released gases, O3, H2S, and H3, making it quite possible that it could travel long distances along the ground, while ammonia could have risen upward since it is lighter than air. As I mentioned earlier, on Sundays, the amount of released gases increased because the residents did not leave for work but stayed in their rooms and started using the exhaust fans in the bathroom and kitchen from early morning until late evening. And so, Sunday, January 12th, 2025 arrived when I was playing billiards in a bar located 800 meters away, but not to the east, but to the west of the gas source. I clearly remember the moment when one of the players sitting at the table suddenly asked, "What is that smell? Do you smell it?" I could clearly tell that it smelled like ammonia. Over these 3 months, I had learned to distinguish between ozone, hydrogen sulfide, and ammonia since they all smelled very different and were simply impossible to confuse. But if I had tried to explain to him what the smell was and where it was coming from, he probably wouldn't have believed me. But what was important was the very fact that the gases were spreading not only to the northeast, but also westward, and I wasn't the only one who could smell them. Jumping ahead, I will say that on the following Sunday, January 19th, 2025, during the Scorebirds swimsuit competition, the smell of ammonia was noticeable in the poolside area where the spectators were sitting. I could smell it simply because I already had a high concentration of ammonia in my blood, and even a small amount of it in the air caused me to feel suffocated, while not all visitors noticed it. I paid attention to a man sitting behind me who periodically brought his hand to his nose and winced. Perhaps he sensed an unpleasant smell, but didn't understand exactly what it was. And the smell there was ammonia. It accumulated in the enclosed space surrounded by the hotel walls and settled in the pool. Ammonia interacts very well with water. It can be said that it alkalizes it. That is precisely why ammonia burns the eyes, because an alkaline environment forms on their surface. That day, January 19th, Leon and I had to fly to Thailand, and I left Scorebirds at around 4 p.m. When I returned to the apartments, I entered a room filled with ammonia as it was Sunday, and the gases had been coming out on the northeast side of the building since the early morning. So I quickly grabbed my backpack and headed to the airport. It was better to wait at the airport than to breathe the gases in the room. Thus, another chapter of this story came to an end. But I skipped something important that happened during the week from January 13th to 19th, which I will tell about in the next chapter. For Chapter 4, Do or Die, literally. So the week from January 13th to January 19th was perhaps the hardest for survival. At night, a mixture of hydrogen sulfide and ozone entered the room, and during the day and evening, ammonia. Because of this, I slept for 12 to 14 hours due to ozone, woke up with a headache, and then, when the ammonia time began, washed my eyes with water and left the room for Clark. But even in Clark, where the air was relatively clean, I felt suffocated because there was already a lot of ammonia in my blood and my lungs were in spasm. I just walked in circles on the pedestrian path and drank a lot of water to flush the ammonia out of my blood. Wednesday and Thursday, January 15 and 16, were particularly difficult. I had inhaled too much ammonia and felt a burning sensation in my chest. On Friday, January 17th, I went to play billiards at Moon's Bar, where I played 2 good games. But during the third solo game, when I leaned over to take a shot, I felt pain in my chest. I got scared, but I wasn't afraid of the pain itself. I was afraid that if something was wrong with my lungs, maybe I shouldn't fly to Thailand. After all, it's known that flying with lung conditions can be dangerous. But staying here wasn't an option either. I needed to get away from the gases, and Thailand was the right place for that. I was also afraid that I might end up disabled for life and have to use an inhaler like one asthmatic acquaintance of mine. My thoughts kept running away, and it was difficult to concentrate on the game, even though I had done a short meditation beforehand, which usually helped me stay focused throughout the game. But now, with every shot I took, my mind kept drifting back to my lung problem. I made mistake after mistake and eventually lost. I made 2 decisions for myself. 1, to see a doctor as soon as possible to understand what was happening to me and whether I could fly on a plane. 2, to write a letter to the building owner, hoping that the problem would be taken seriously and resolved. The building owner's address was listed in my contract. In the letter, I explained everything that had happened and outlined the existing problem, asking either to have it fixed by the plumbers or to allow me to fix the problem myself. I stated that I was willing to fix everything completely free of charge within 2 days. On the first day, to check all the rooms, and on the second day, to install an elbow pipe in the rooms where it was needed. I really was ready to fix everything completely for free and at my own expense, since according to my estimates, the cost of the work was about 1,000 PHP. I assumed that they had already fixed half of the rooms in the southern part of the building and that a maximum of 20 rooms remained, and the cost of an elbow pipe was only 45 PHP. I had spent too much money on repairs and setting up the rooms, first on the third floor and then on the fifth, so another 1,000 PHP was not such a big price to pay for the possibility of comfortable living. After all, I really liked the place and I really wanted to live there, but for that, it was important to eliminate the air pollution inside and around the building. You may ask, how'd I get myself into so much trouble? Why didn't I leave immediately when I discovered the problems back in October, November? The answer lies in the fact that I assumed I was dealing with educated people who, like me, understood that an open sewage system, especially when there is a septic tank, is wrong and should be fixed as soon as possible. And since back in October, when I pointed out that the grease trap was installed incorrectly, all 44 rooms could have been fixed within a week, I thought that leaving over this issue wasn't necessary since the problem was quite simple to solve. And when the plumbers themselves suggested a solution with the installation of an elbow pipe and reinstalling the grease traps was no longer needed, the problem could have been solved in just 1 to 2 days. Although in this case, the grease traps themselves would remain useless and would not be able to perform the function they were intended for, the main thing was that gases from the sewage system would stop coming outside. Thus, I wrote a letter to the building owner and sent it the next day, on Saturday, January 18th. I also went to see a doctor. The doctor said that the situation was not critical and recommended that I fly to Thailand and after that move to another place to avoid exposure to the gases. He also prescribed me an inhaler and a couple of lung tests, a CT scan of the lungs, and spirometry. I really found myself in a do-or-die situation. Either I would solve the problem with the gases, or I would die if I continued living there. And although they told me, we can no longer entertain you, and threatened eviction if I continued to complain, I had nothing left to lose because I was already planning to leave if they did not allow me to fix the problem or did not fix it themselves. So I sent the letter and left for Thailand, hoping that at least the building owner would realize the seriousness of the situation and resolve it as soon as possible. Chapter 5. Kick out from Angeles. Kick out from Mabalacat. The time in Thailand was divided into two halves. For the first 3 days, I walked around and felt a lack of oxygen, even though I was using the inhaler prescribed by the doctor. The remaining days went normally, and by the end of my stay in Thailand, I even forgot to use the inhaler because I didn't feel the need for it. Thailand really did me good, as after a week of living without gases, my blood was cleansed. Returning to the Philippines, I realized that they had not fixed anything because ammonia was once again coming from the balcony side. And on the evening of January 27th, I received an email stating that they were terminating the contract with me and demanding that I vacate the apartment by the end of January. Thus, I had 4 days to find new apartments and move out, even though I had paid from January 14th to February 14th. Since there was very little time to find an apartment for the move, the next day I went to see the apartments I had looked at back in 2023. I paid for them 15 minutes before the end of the workday, and the next day, January 29th, was a holiday and a day off. So if I hadn't managed to pay on Tuesday, January 28th, I would have lost another day. That same day, Leon and I moved part of my things, and the second part on the next day. And on January 30th, I returned the keys to the room. And although I moved from Angeles to Mabalacat, it was still not over yet. I spent only one night in the new apartment, from January 29th to January 30th. Then the gas nightmare began again. Already on the evening of January 30th, I realized that I would not be able to sleep here. The smell of ammonia was once again in the room. Moreover, airing out the room did not have a positive effect. The room's windows faced south toward a blank wall, and at night, the temperature difference between the south side and the north side was non existent. So it seemed that opening the door and windows did not create airflows in either direction. However, as it turned out later, airing out couldn't have helped anyway, since the gases were coming from outside, and ventilation only worsened the situation. After several hours of trying to ventilate the room somehow, I realized that I had to leave, as I began to feel not only burning in my eyes and nose, but also in my chest. At about 1 o'clock at night, I went to McDonald's near the Wilcon Depot construction store, and then found a hotel where I stayed for the night. Jumping ahead, I will say that I changed rooms and moved to the north side, but even that did not help, and for several nights before leaving for Olongapo, I slept in this hotel, first choosing a room based on smell and asking the staff not to turn on the air conditioner. This was because, over a long period of gas exposure, the building had also become saturated with ammonia, and when the air conditioner was turned on, it would draw ammonia into the room, making it difficult to sleep. A couple of nights, I managed to sleep in my apartment when the weather forecast showed that the wind was blowing from the north or east. On other days, I had to pay for a hotel to sleep. I went to Pure Gold Dow for water and saw that the building I had moved into was not protected by a wall as I had thought, but on the contrary, it was located exactly where the gas flows were directed. By then, I had no doubt that the gases were reaching a distance of 1.5 to 2 kilometers. As I mentioned earlier, on the northeast side, there are 31 exhaust vents, and from some of them, gases are expelled in the northeast direction for several hours a day. This has been happening daily since late October 2024, with only the type of gas changing. Sometimes hydrogen sulfide, sometimes ammonia, and if lucky, ozone. The gases travel northeast and hit the corner between the west wall of Pure Gold Dow and the south wall of the Social Security System Dayu branch, from where, like through an exhaust pipe, they move into the space between buildings and end up precisely in the building where I had moved. Whether you believe in God or the intelligent universe, this feels like some kind of mysticism, as if someone deliberately placed me first in a building with a faulty sewage system, and specifically in a room located under the exhaust pipe of the management office's ventilation. And then, when I could not solve the gas problem, they sent me from the gas epicenter to the point of their disposal, as if to say, "You failed the task I assigned to you. So I am placing you in such unbearable conditions that living here is impossible, so that you understand that people suffer from the gases even at such a great distance from their source. And you will still have to solve this problem because other people do not know where the gases are coming from and are simply forced to breathe them and suffer from them." The fact that other people who ended up in the affected area also suffered from the gases was beyond doubt. I was not unique in this sense. One evening, I was buying a bottle of water at a pharmacy near McDonald's, and right in front of me, a Filipino man was buying the exact same inhaler that my doctor had prescribed. Coincidence? I don't think so. Either it was another sign from God, or the demand for inhalers had increased so much that the probability of someone buying an inhaler right in front of me had risen several times, and sooner or later I would have seen someone buying one. However, if you live in a place where there are no gases and come to Walking Street once a day for a couple of hours, then in those couple of hours, you may not feel the effect of inhaling the gases, as the concentration of gases in the blood may be too low for a person to say that something strange is happening to them. The body may react, and you might just decide it's time to go home without ever understanding the reason. It's like the experiment with the umbrella, where a person was given a hypnotic suggestion to take an umbrella, and when asked why they took it, their brain came up with an explanation. Similarly, here you simply wanted to leave Walking Street seat, but why you wanted to, just because. The body reacted to danger, gases, and the brain created the necessary explanation for why it happened. So, even though I had paid 60,000 PHP in advance for several months of apartment rent, I was still homeless. My belongings remained unpacked, and I had to pay a hotel just to sleep. The most important daily desire was simple, just to get a good night's sleep. That is why I made the decision to move far away from the gases so that I could record a video and tell this story. However, something still kept me in Angeles and Mabalacat, undergoing medical examinations. After returning from Thailand, I scheduled a CT scan of my lungs and spirometry, so I was waiting for the results and the doctor's recommendations. As a result of the examinations, a slight lung fibrosis was detected, and as soon as the doctor prescribed treatment on that same day, February 6, Leon drove me to Olongapo, where I am now, and for the fifth day in a row, I have been working on this video to tell my story. Why am I doing this? I just want to live normally and breathe fresh air. I couldn't solve the gas problem on my own, and since the management of the building where the gases come from lives on the southern side and sits in an office on the southwestern side, they don't feel the gases and don't understand the problem I've been telling them about for 3 months straight. I am sure that this information concerns many people who live in the affected area, and they will bring this information to CENRO, City Environment and Natural Resources Office, Angeles, and DENR, Department of Environment and Natural Resources. I urge everyone who is concerned about this problem and who is tired of breathing gases on Walking Street, or perhaps those who live in the affected area and breathe them constantly, to contact the appropriate organizations and resolve the issue. This is not a situation where you should just silently endure it, guided by the principles of hiya and loss of face. There is no harmony in the fact that due to the wrong decisions of 1-2 people, the management or the building owner, the lives and health of several thousand others are put at risk. If something like this happened in my country, which is hard to imagine in itself because plumbers in my country understand that a grease trap should be installed in a way that prevents sewer gases from entering the room. But if this did happen, the apartment management would apologize, thank me for finding the problem, and fix it as quickly as possible because they know that in case of air pollution, they would have to pay a fine equivalent to several thousand US dollars. They understand that it's better to spend 1,000 PHP in 2 days to fix everything and breathe clean air rather than pay a fine of several thousand US dollars. The situation where the entire building operates like a chemical factory on Sundays, poisoning people all day long, is not normal. Do I plan to return to Angeles? Definitely. Yes, right now I have nowhere to return to. I have become homeless because living in the new place is impossible due to the gases that are constantly present there 24 hours a day. They simply accumulate in that gap between buildings like in a ventilation pipe. As soon as the problem is resolved, of course, I will return. And if it is not resolved, you may ask, well, then I will consider that I did everything I could and will look for housing in Clark. Of course, Angeles, Mabalacat, and Clark are all in the affected area, but Clark is the least affected. If God or the intelligent universe chose me to solve this problem, then I have done everything within my power. I tried to solve it myself, lost money, nerves, and health, but now that I have talked about the problem and how it can be solved, it's your turn, Filipinos. Spread this video. Contact DNR, CENRO, or any other authority you see fit to solve the problem as soon as possible and start breathing fresh air.